I
You
need
are
you to step
standing on
back
your own
right
front
now.
porch,
This is your
sipping
final
morning
warning.
coffee in your
I
sweatpants.
am on my own property, officer.
Suddenly,
I have
patrol
not
cars
committed any
screech to a
crime.
halt.
I know my
Officers
rights, and I am
demanding
not
you prove
stepping
you
back.
belong in your own home. They expected a frightened suspect. Instead, they cornered a federal prosecutor. They picked the absolutely wrong woman. Olivia Carmichael had spent the last 72 hours inside the fluorescent-lit war room of the federal courthouse, dismantling a multi-million-dollar interstate trafficking ring. As the newly appointed United States Attorney for the district, her life was a blur of tailored suits, press conferences, and high-stakes grand jury proceedings. But on this particular Saturday morning, Olivia was just a homeowner seeking a rare moment of peace. She had recently purchased a sprawling mid-century modern home in Hawthorne Hills, an affluent, aggressively manicured subdivision where the lawns looked like golf courses, and the neighbors communicated almost exclusively through passive-aggressive posts on the local community app. Olivia loved the house, even if she hadn't had much time to meet the neighbors. At 8:15 a.m., she stepped out onto her wide mahogany front porch. She was dressed for comfort, wearing a faded Georgetown law hoodie, loose gray sweatpants, and a pair of worn-out fuzzy slippers. Her hair was pulled up into a messy bun, and she held a steaming ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. She took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, admiring the quiet street. 3 houses down, peering through the pristine white plantation blinds of her living room window, was Brenda Wallace. Brenda was the self-appointed guardian of Hawthorne Hills. She treated the neighborhood watch like a tactical military operation. Seeing a black woman in a worn-out hoodie standing casually on the porch of the Carmichael residence, a house Brenda knew had just been sold for over $1 million, sent her into immediate high alert. Brenda didn't walk over to introduce herself. She didn't wave. Instead, she picked up her smartphone, dialed 911, and used her most breathless, frantic voice. "Yes, dispatch. I need police at 4420 Oakleaf Drive immediately. There is a suspicious individual lurking on the front porch. She looks completely out of place, unkempt, and I think she might be casing the property or trying to break in. The new owners just bought it, and this woman is definitely not them." 10 minutes later, the tranquility of Olivia's morning was shattered. Olivia was bending over to inspect a potted fern when the heavy hum of speeding engines caught her attention. 2 local police cruisers rounded the corner of Oakleaf Drive, accelerating far faster than the residential speed limit allowed. They didn't hit the sirens, but their light bars were flashing a blinding red and blue. They swerved into her driveway, tires chirping aggressively against the pristine concrete. Olivia stood up slowly, her brow furrowing. She didn't panic. In her line of work, she dealt with law enforcement daily, captains, federal agents, and detectives who treated her with the utmost reverence. But she recognized the aggressive posture of the 2 officers who immediately burst from their vehicles. The lead officer, a heavy-set man in his late 40s with a tightly shaved head and an arrogant swagger, was Officer Derek Stanton. His hand rested conspicuously on the butt of his service weapon. Flanking him was Officer Brian Hayes, a younger, nervous-looking rookie who kept his eyes darting around as if expecting an ambush. "Hey you, hands where I can see them," Stanton barked, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet suburban street. Olivia didn't flinch. She calmly took a sip of her coffee, her eyes locking onto Stanton's. She lowered the mug. "Good morning, officers. Is there a problem?" "Step down from the porch now," Stanton ordered, closing the distance. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, radiating hostility. "Do not make any sudden movements." "I'm perfectly fine standing right here on my porch," Olivia replied, her voice smooth, measured, and entirely devoid of fear. It was the exact tone she used when cross-examining a hostile witness on the stand. "What seems to be the issue?" Stanton's face re-eamed. He wasn't used to defiance, especially not from someone he had already categorized in his mind as a suspect. "We received a call about a potential burglary in progress, a suspicious person casing this property. Now, I need you to put the cup down, step off the porch, and provide some identification." Olivia looked at him, then looked at the open solid oak front door behind her, then back to the officers. "A burglary in progress. Officer, I am drinking coffee in my slippers. Does this look like a tactical breach to you?" "I don't need the attitude," Stanton snapped, taking a step up onto the porch, violating her personal space. The rookie, Hayes, hovered nervously near the patrol car. You don't fit the profile of the people who live in this neighborhood. We need to verify who you are and what you're doing here. Hand over your ID. Olivia's posture shifted. The relaxed homeowner vanished, and the U.S. attorney stepped into the light. Officer Olivia paused, her eyes narrowing as she read the silver name plate pinned to his chest. Officer Stanton, under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution and the established precedents of this state, you cannot compel me to identify myself unless you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime. Being black in a sweatshirt in a wealthy neighborhood is not a criminal statute. Stanton blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the legal jargon. It was a brief flicker of uncertainty, but it was quickly swallowed by a surge of bruised ego and anger. Listen to me very carefully, Stanton sneered, his hand moving away from his gun, but coming to rest aggressively on his duty belt. I don't know what internet law degree you printed out, but out here on the street, I give the orders. You are trespassing on private property, and you are currently interfering with a police investigation. If you do not produce ID in the next 5 seconds, I am putting you in handcuffs. The morning air felt suddenly thick. Several neighbors, including Brenda Wallace, had now stepped out onto their manicured lawns, watching the spectacle unfold like a live theater production. Olivia Carmichael remained as still as a statue. She knew the law better than the men standing in front of her. She knew that reaching into her pockets for her wallet right now could be misinterpreted by an agitated officer. But more importantly, she knew she had absolutely no legal obligation to comply with an unlawful order on her own property. Let me be incredibly clear, Officer Stanton, Olivia said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying a terrifyingly calm authority. I am not trespassing. I am not interfering, and I am certainly not going to hand over my private information to satisfy your baseless profiling. You are standing on my property without a warrant. I suggest you step off my porch. Officer Hayes, the rookie, finally spoke up, trying to play peacekeeper, but failing miserably. Look, ma'am, if you just live here, just show us your ID. It takes 2 seconds. Why make this difficult? If you don't belong here, just tell us. I am making it difficult, Officer Hayes, Olivia said, shifting her gaze to the younger man. Because my civil rights do not evaporate just because your dispatcher got a phone call from a busybody neighbor who doesn't like my complexion. You are operating outside your jurisdiction of authority. You have no probable cause. That's it, Stanton growled. He unclipped his handcuffs with a sharp metallic snap. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. You're being detained for obstruction of justice and failure to identify. Olivia didn't step back. She didn't raise her hands to defend herself. She looked Stanton dead in the eye and delivered a warning so icy it could have frozen the sweat on his forehead. If you place those metal cuffs on my wrists, Derek Stanton, I promise you it will be the defining mistake of your entire professional career. You will not just face a lawsuit. You will face a reckoning that will strip you of your badge, your pension, and your pride. Stanton hesitated. The sheer conviction in her voice was unnatural for a suspect. People usually yelled, cried, or fought. They didn't deliver calm, surgical threats that sounded like a judge handing down a sentence. You threatening a police officer, Stanton challenged, though his voice lacked its previous booming confidence. Clears throat. It's not a threat. It's a legal guarantee, Olivia replied smoothly. She slowly lifted her left hand, keeping her palm open and visible, and pointed toward the street. Before you make a decision you cannot undo, I highly suggest you get on your radio and call your watch commander. Ask for Captain David Miller. Tell him you are at 442 Oakleaf Drive. Tell him who you are talking to. Stanton scoffed, though his grip on the handcuffs loosened slightly. I'm not calling the captain for a routine trespasser. I am not a trespasser and I am not a civilian, Olivia said, her eyes flashing with dangerous intensity. I am the chief federal law enforcement officer for this district. I am the United States Attorney, and if you don't call Captain Miller right now, I will. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the porch. The rookie Hayes visibly palled. His eyes widened, and he instinctively took a half-step backward away from Olivia. He knew the name of the new U.S. Attorney. They had received a memo about her appointment just 2 weeks ago at roll call. Stanton's face went through a rapid series of micro-expressions. Disbelief, confusion, defensive anger, and finally a creeping sense of dread. He looked at Olivia's messy bun and fuzzy slippers, trying to reconcile the image of a high-powered federal prosecutor with the woman standing before him. His pride refused to let him back down completely, but his survival instinct was screaming at him. "You're lying," Stanton muttered. But he didn't move to cuff her. "Am I?" Olivia challenged, taking a slow step forward, forcing Stanton to hold his ground or retreat. "There's an easy way to find out, Derek. Call him, or better yet, call Chief Robertson. I had dinner with him on Thursday. I'm sure he'd love to hear how his patrol officers are treating homeowners in Hawthorne Hills." Hayes didn't wait for Stanton's permission. Hands shaking slightly, the rookie grabbed the radio mic clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. Can we get the watch commander to our location at Oakleaf Drive? Code 4, but we need a supervisor on scene." "Copy that. For Bravo, Captain Miller is en route. ETA 5 minutes." Olivia offered a tight, merciless smile. She walked over to the patio chair, sat down, and crossed her legs, sipping her coffee while the two officers stood awkwardly in her driveway. 5 minutes, Olivia said quietly. "Let's see how much you both learn about constitutional law in 5 minutes." The 5 minutes it took for the watch commander to arrive felt like an eternity for the two patrol officers. But for Olivia Carmichael, it was a masterclass in psychological dominance. She didn't scroll on her phone. She didn't call a lawyer. She simply sat in her patio chair, her hands wrapped around her ceramic mug, her dark eyes locked dead onto Derek Stanton. She watched the sweat begin to bead along his hairline. She watched him shift his weight from his left foot to his right, the arrogant swagger slowly leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. Across the pristine lawns of Hawthorne Hills, the audience was growing. Brenda Wallace had emerged from behind her plantation blinds and was now standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed tightly over her pastel cardigan. She wore a look of smug satisfaction, chatting eagerly with a neighboring couple who had come out to walk their golden retriever. Brenda was waiting for the inevitable climax, the handcuffs, the perp walk, the validation of her paranoid biases. "You know," Stanton muttered, trying to project a confidence he no longer felt, his thumb nervously stroking his utility belt. "If you really are who you say you are, you should understand why we have to investigate suspicious calls. We're just doing our jobs." "Doing your job requires adhering to the Constitution, officer," Olivia replied, her voice cutting through the crisp morning air like a scalpel. "What you are doing is acting as an armed enforcement mechanism for neighborhood prejudice. You bypassed a consensual encounter and escalated straight to a Terry stop without a shred of articulable suspicion. You didn't investigate. You presumed before Stanton could muster a defensive reply." A sleek black unmarked Ford Explorer turned onto Oakleaf Drive. It didn't have flashing lights, but the speed at which it took the corner signaled absolute urgency. The SUV screeched to a halt right behind Stanton's cruiser, blocking the street entirely. The driver's side door flew open, and Captain David Miller stepped out. Miller was a 20-year veteran of the force, a man whose silver hair and sharp tactical demeanor commanded instant respect. He was intimately familiar with the political landscape of the city. He knew the mayor. He knew the judges. And he certainly knew the newly confirmed United States attorney, having attended her swearing-in ceremony just a month prior. Miller took one look at the scene. Stanton standing aggressively on the walkway. Hayes looking like he wanted to vomit in the bushes, and Olivia Carmichael sitting on her porch in sweatpants sipping coffee. All the blood drained from Captain Miller's face. "Stanton. Hayes. Fall back now," Miller barked, his voice cracking like a whip. Stanton swallowed hard. "Captain, we got a 911 call about." I said fall back, shut your mouth, and step away from the property." Miller roared, his composure shattering. Stanton and Hayes practically stumbled backward onto the asphalt. Miller took a deep breath, unbuttoned his uniform jacket, and walked up the driveway alone. As he approached the porch, he didn't swagger. He removed his uniform cap, tucking it under his arm, his posture one of complete deference. "Madam U.S. Attorney," Miller said, his voice loud enough for Stanton and Hayes to hear clearly. "I cannot begin to express my profound apologies for this situation." Behind Miller, Stanton's jaw dropped. The heavy-set officer physically swayed, his hand falling limply away from his duty belt. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The woman he had just threatened to handcuff, the woman he had just accused of printing a fake internet law degree, was the highest-ranking federal law enforcement official in the district. She was the woman who authorized federal indictments against corrupt cops. Hayes closed his eyes, whispering a desperate prayer to a god he hadn't spoken to since childhood. Olivia set her coffee mug down on the glass patio table. The sharp clink echoed loudly. She stood up, her 5 feet 9 inches in frame suddenly seeming to tower over the scene. "Good morning, Captain Miller," Olivia said, her tone professional but entirely devoid of warmth. "I wish I could say it's a pleasure to see you, but considering your officers just threatened to arrest me for drinking coffee on my own porch, I'm afraid we have a severe problem." "We do, Mom, and it will be handled immediately," Miller said, turning a furious glare over his shoulder at Stanton. "Officer Stanton and Officer Hayes will be suspended pending a full internal affairs investigation. This is a catastrophic breach of protocol and frankly of common sense." Stanton took a step forward, his voice trembling. "Ma'am, we were dispatched. The call said there was a black woman on a porch." Stanton Olivia interrupted her voice, snapping like a trap. "And instead of assessing the situation with your eyes and your training, you let your implicit bias dictate your actions. You approached me with your hand on your weapon. You demanded papers like a checkpoint guard. You threatened me with physical detainment if I were anyone else. If I didn't know exactly how to dismantle your unlawful orders, I would be in the back of your cruiser right now, or worse." Miller nodded grimly. "You are entirely right, Miss Carmichael. There is no excuse. I will take their badges right here and now if you want." Olivia looked at the 2 officers. Then her gaze drifted past them out towards the street. She looked at the small crowd of neighbors, her eyes locked onto Brenda Wallace, who was still standing at the end of her driveway, straining her neck to see why the police weren't arresting the intruder. "We will deal with the disciplinary actions of your officers, Captain," Olivia said softly, a dangerous new edge entering her voice. "But they are only half the problem. An officer is the weapon, but somebody pulled the trigger." Miller frowned, following her gaze. "Ma'am, I want the dispatch audio pulled." "Now," Olivia commanded. "I want to know exactly what the caller said to generate this level of police response, because swatting a federal prosecutor is a felony, and filing a false police report rooted in racial animus is a crime I am particularly passionate about prosecuting." Captain Miller didn't hesitate. He pulled the radio from his belt and contacted the communication center. Within 60 seconds, the audio file from the 911 call was forwarded to his department-issued smartphone. Standing on the porch, Miller played the audio on speaker. Brenda Wallace's frantic, breathless voice filled the air. "Suspicious individual lurking on the front porch. She looks completely out of place, unkempt, and I think she might be casing the property or trying to break in. The new owners just bought it, and this woman is definitely not them." Olivia listened, her face an unreadable mask. When the recording ended, she looked at Miller. "Captain, I am formally requesting that you take a walk with me," Olivia said. "Of course, ma'am." Olivia stepped off her porch. For the first time that morning, she left her property. She walked down her driveway, her fuzzy slippers softly padding against the concrete. Captain Miller walked in lockstep beside her. Behind them, trailing like chastised children, were Stanton and Hayes. The small procession moved deliberately down the sidewalk of Oakleaf Drive, heading straight for the house 3 doors down. Brenda Wallace watched them approach. At first, a massive triumphant smile spread across her face. She thought the officers were bringing the suspect to her, so she could make a positive identification. She stood tall, adjusting her cardigan, ready to play the hero of Hawthorne Hills. "Officers, Captain," Brenda called out, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I am so glad you got here so quickly. I was watching from my window. You just can't be too careful these days with the element moving around." "Mrs. Wallace," Captain Miller cut in, his voice gruff and devoid of any community policing warmth. "I need you to listen very carefully and stop talking." Brenda's smile faltered. She looked at Miller, then at the 2 pale, sweating patrolmen, and finally at Olivia, who was standing a mere 3 feet away, staring at her with terrifying composure. "I don't understand," Brenda stammered. Did you arrest her?" "Brenda, is it?" Olivia spoke up. Her voice was conversational, yet it carried the weight of a falling gavel. "My name is Olivia Carmichael. I am the owner of 4420 Oakleaf Drive. I closed on the property 3 weeks ago. I also happen to be the United States Attorney for this federal district. Brenda's eyes widened to the size of saucers. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked physically ill. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The neighboring couple with the golden retriever, standing a few yards away, suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting and began awkwardly backing away toward their own home. You called 911. Olivia continued, stepping slightly closer, invading Brenda's meticulously curated personal space. You tied up emergency resources and you dispatched armed agents of the state to my home because you decided I did not fit your profile of a homeowner in this neighborhood. You claimed I was casing the property. You told dispatch I was not the owner, stating it as a verified fact rather than a paranoid assumption. I was just concerned for the neighborhood. Brenda gasped, taking a step back, her voice shrill and defensive. I didn't know. You were wearing sweatpants. You didn't look like you didn't look professional. I was drinking coffee on my own porch on a Saturday morning. Olivia counted, her eyes narrowing. But let's talk about the law, Brenda, since you enjoy involving law enforcement in community affairs. Are you familiar with the state penal code regarding the misuse of the 911 emergency system? Brenda shook her head, terrified. It is a Class A misdemeanor to report a crime when you have no factual basis to believe a crime has occurred, Olivia explained, her tone surgical. Furthermore, weaponizing the police against a citizen based on their race opens you up to civil liability under federal civil rights statutes. You didn't just make a mistake, Brenda. You recklessly endangered my life. If these officers had been a fraction more aggressive, your little phone call could have ended in a shooting. I didn't mean it like that. I swear. Brenda was practically hyperventilating now, tears of profound embarrassment and fear welling in her eyes. The neighborhood watch commander was being publicly dismantled on her own front lawn. Olivia turned to Captain Miller. Captain, I am filing a formal complaint against Mrs. Wallace for making a false police report and misusing the 911 system. I expect a detective to take her statement this afternoon. We will see what the district attorney's office decides to do with it. Yes, ma'am. I will assign a detective immediately, Miller confirmed. Clear's throat. Brenda let out a small sob, burying her face in her hands. Her pristine suburban image shattered into a million irrecoverable pieces. Olivia didn't offer a shred of sympathy. She turned her attention back to the two patrol officers. Stanton couldn't even meet her gaze. He was staring at the pavement, his career in ruins. Officer Stanton, Olivia said quietly. Stanton flinched, looking up. Your badge is a public trust, Olivia told him, her voice echoing in the quiet street. It is not a weapon for neighborhood racists to wield whenever they feel uncomfortable. You failed your badge today. You failed the Constitution. And most importantly, you failed the community you are sworn to protect. When Internal Affairs calls you in on Monday, I suggest you think very carefully about whether you belong in law enforcement. She looked at the rookie. Officer Hayes, you knew it was wrong. I saw it in your eyes, but you stood by and let your senior officer violate my rights because you were too cowardly to intervene. Courage isn't just about facing criminals. It's about standing up to the badge next to you when it goes rogue. Do better. Hayes nodded vigorously, tears pooling in his own eyes. Yes, ma'am. I will. I'm so sorry. The silence that followed was absolute. The birds seemed to have stopped chirping. The wind had died down. The entire street of Hawthorne Hills had been given a brutal, unforgettable lesson in reality. Olivia Carmichael didn't wait for further apologies. She had said everything that needed to be said. She turned her back on the trembling neighbor, the disgraced cops, and the apologetic captain. She walked slowly back up her driveway, her fuzzy slippers scraping softly against the concrete. She climbed the steps to her wide mahogany porch, picked up her ceramic mug from the glass table, and took a long sip. The coffee was cold, but the victory was warm. She turned around, looking out at the police cruisers slowly backing out of her driveway, their lights finally switched off. She was home, and nobody in Hawthorne Hills would ever question her right to be there again. This shocking real-life encounter proves that knowing your rights is your greatest shield. No matter who you are or where you live, Olivia Carmichael turned a terrifying moment of profiling into a masterclass in justice and accountability. If you love this story of a brilliant woman turning the tables on a biased system, hit that like button. Share this video to spread awareness about knowing your rights. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible, dramatic, true stories.